So hey guys, this is everything I always wanted to know about WordPress, but only learned through experience. But not really everything. It's more like just some stuff that I've learned through using WordPress for a long time. So first of all, just to let you know who I am and kind of what my perspective on this stuff is. As Greg told you, my name's Joe Chellman. I do business under the name Shoefly Design. You can find me on Twitter that way and so forth. I come from there originally, New Hampshire, but in terms of my WordPress experience, I'm a web designer in the old school sense, where old school means like mid-90s, I guess, where you had to do everything yourself. So I've done a little bit of design, a lot of development, and kind of putting all that stuff together. I build WordPress sites for work. I build WordPress sites for friends and for some of my own stuff, and as well as the other things that I work in that Greg mentioned. So I tell you that just to sort of give you an idea of where I'm coming from in terms of my perspective on WordPress and how you might use it, and that will just color everything that you see. So I'm going to go over two general buckets of stuff that you might, I guess that would help you along in your journey with WordPress. We're going to look at first a bunch of stuff on just using WordPress. So if you're the sort of person who just wants somebody else to, like, you got your hosting company to install WordPress for you, you're using WordPress.com, that sort of thing, and you're just using WordPress on a daily basis or not daily basis, whatever, but you're in the capacity of just using it, there will be some stuff for you. And then also, I'm going to look at building things with WordPress. So if you're looking to get more into making themes, or if you want to take a WordPress site, install it yourself, and then do a bunch of customizations yourself, there will be things that are more in that direction. So it's all going to be introductory WordPress type stuff, and it'll be kind of along these two paths. Okay, so first we'll look at the group of things that are related to using WordPress. The first thing that I would tell you if you're just getting started with WordPress is use WordPress.com. Even if you're in a position where you're expecting to build your own site and you look at WordPress.com's themes and you're like, these things don't look anything like I want my site to look. It's still nice to start with that because there's no installation, you don't have to deal with any hassle whatsoever. And the other nice thing is that when you're done, you can export all your stuff into a self-installed WordPress installation and everything will be fine. WordPress.com has some customizations that you don't get when you install WordPress yourself just out of the box, but you'll be able to augment that with plugins and get everything back. And then there's also this plugin called Jetpack, which ties into a WordPress.com account, which you can keep even if you decide you want to delete your WordPress.com blog. You can still have that account, and you get to tie into WordPress.com's cloud features that will give you, various extra features. So I guess that's also a general shout out for this plugin Jetpack. If you're looking to do things like add a contact form to your WordPress site or any of a bajillion other things, it does a lot of stuff and should definitely be a place that you look when you start installing your own plugins on your own WordPress site. Okay, so here's another thing that I feel like might not be something that everybody knows when they start working with WordPress, is that, okay, yes, we all know that you can upload a picture. You can upload a bunch of pictures and various kinds of media, and with the newer versions, I guess in WordPress 3.6, you have things like nice audio and video players built right in. But what you may not know is that you can actually use this little edit image button to do some rudimentary image editing right there in WordPress. So you can do things like cropping and rotating your images, flipping them, all kinds of stuff. It's all right in there, which is neat. And you can affect the WordPress generates thumbnails for you and all that kind of stuff, and you can operate just on those generated thumbnails. And so there's a lot of power there. And one other thing that's nice is that the edits are destructive to your original uploaded image in terms of what your result is, but you can always revert to the original image that you uploaded. So it's a thing that you can play with, and it's fine. You can always revert and start over. And if you want to find out more about that, there's documentation on WordPress.com for that, which is nice. I'm referring to WordPress.com in this case. There's also the WordPress.org codex, which is the other place that you would find documentation on WordPress. Because WordPress.com is their commercial and free product, I find that some of the documentation is much more nicely written. So I'll refer you there. Okay, another thing that I find when working in WordPress, this actually is something that I discovered fairly recently, is just how sneaky screen options are. So when I say screen options, I mean when you're looking at a screen in the WordPress dashboard where you're editing your posts or editing, all kinds of various things. Up there in the top right, there's this thing that says screen options, and you will see these everywhere. Not quite on every single screen, but they're all over the place. And so in this case, here's the one for pages disclosed, and you can see that there's various options. This is on your pages overview screen. It's the same as on the posts overview screen. And so you can turn off different columns, and you can also say how many items are shown at one time. And if you didn't look in screen options, you wouldn't know that stuff exists. The one that I found most eye-opening, I guess, is in the custom menu editor. So when you're building a WordPress site that's not necessarily just a blogger, even if it is, you can create a custom menu system where you can insert particular pages into drop-down menus and do all this kind of visual editing and stuff. But if you wanted to style a specific menu item, depending on how your theme is set up, you might not be able to do it. You might say something like, hey, I'd really love to be able to put a class on this link that's in my menu. Or I'd really like this link to open in a new window when I click it. But there doesn't seem to be any way to do that without having to go in and tear my theme apart. Well, I'm here to tell you that you don't have to tear your theme apart. If you turn on the screen options and then, whoops, let's get you back up there. Here we go. So these advanced menu properties, like the link target, will give you that target attribute in your HTML that lets you open a link in a new window, or various other things like that. So what I'm saying is, when you're dealing with the WordPress dashboard, look for screen options and see what other kinds of stuff is not necessarily turned on by default, or things that you think get in the way that you would like to turn off. Okay, another thing that longtime WordPress users will know, obviously, but beginners might not, is this thing called Quick Edit. So when you're looking at your posts overview screen or your pages overview screen, if you mouse over any of the titles or just any of these links, you'll see this thing called Quick Edit. And you might not pay much attention to it, but it's kind of neat. It lets you do things, well, it basically lets you edit all that stuff. And depending on plugins that you might be using, if you're using, say, WooCommerce, something like that, it also has a quick edit hookup that will give you all kinds of goodies where you can just make changes right there on the overview screen without having to switch into the full edit view and just let you do some stuff pretty fast. So this can be especially nice if if you have, say, a post or a page or something that's getting a lot of comments and it's annoying you. You could just get in here and turn that off pretty easily. Speaking of which, one thing that I recommend when you first install WordPress is what I'm calling here Stop the Discussion Madness. So when WordPress comes out of the box, you should check to see, I can't remember what the settings are with one that just is freshly installed, but I recommend that you take a look in the settings area under discussion and check these boxes right at the top of the screen. And I would recommend that you make sure that pingbacks and trackbacks are turned off by default, because nobody uses those things anymore. I'm pretty sure they are off by default now, but just in case, make sure. Because that's just nothing but a spam honeypot, and it'll just annoy you. They probably won't show up on your site, but I recommend that you turn them off. Related to that, there are a couple of plugins that I think you should take a look at. One is called Pingback Killer, which takes this a little farther if you're never going to use pingbacks, and let's face it, you're probably not. Whether you know what a pingback or a trackback is or not, just trust me, you're probably not going to want to use them. And this Pingback Killer plugin, it's a very small plugin that just basically makes WordPress not respond to any of that stuff. It's not just that your post has that stuff turned off by default, it just will not listen to those kinds of requests. So I put that on pretty much all my sites. There's another one called No Page Comment, and I think there's a related plugin called No Page Comments Please or something like that. But basically when WordPress ships, you can add comments to pages. And I mean, in most cases, especially if you're building a WordPress in the sort of a CMS way, where it's not necessarily just a blog, and you're going to be dealing with a lot of pages, you don't want to have to turn off comments on every single newly created page, or if you've inherited a site with a bunch of pages in it, you don't want to have to deal with turning all those things off one at a time manually, even in Quick Edit. So No Page Comment can help you with that. It can help you keep comments turned off on all the newly created pages and help you turn them off on all your existing pages. Okay, speaking of plugins, another thing that I recommend is don't go crazy on plugins. Every plugin that you add on your website while adding useful functionality also is a vector for possible security exploits. So you could get in trouble with this if you have a bunch of plugins that are installed and maybe you're not super great about updating them, or they're just old, or maybe they weren't well written, who knows. But it just, you set yourself up as a target for security problems. And it'll just kind of make your site slower over time. The more plugins you add, the more memory you're going to be using and the slower your site could get. So just be careful about the plugins you're using. Turn off and preferably delete or move out of the WordPress installation any that you're not using, and just be scrupulous about it. Okay. When you're starting working with WordPress, a lot of times people will look at what's available for themes in the WordPress theme repository, all the free stuff. A lot of great stuff in there, but maybe you think that's not for you. And so you go looking in some place like ThemeForest or any of the other places where you can buy a commercial theme. And you're looking around and you find a theme that looks really good. It looks nice, and you're thinking, hey, I think this will really work for me, mostly. So I'm here to tell you that just beware of the 80-20 rule in this case. There's a lot of different ways that people talk about the 80-20 rule. What I'm referring to here is that, okay, pie is delicious, but cleaning up a lame theme is not. If you get a theme that only gets you 80% of the way there or so, that last 20% could be very painful. So just be careful of that. I've had a lot of, in just my own work experience, I've had to work with a lot of people who buy a commercial theme and it's like, yeah, I mean, this thing is great, but we're so close, we think, but then that just getting that last percentage, whatever it is, be it 20 or whatever, is just a pain. So watch out for that. Sometimes it might be good to work with somebody who, if you're not comfortable doing this yourself. It can be nice to work with someone who can build the thing from scratch for you that really meets your requirements from the beginning. Okay, another thing to watch out for with custom themes, especially in the commercial space where you're buying it, is something that's overly handy. WordPress is cool in that you can do things like create custom post types. So if you're building a site for a band, you could get a theme for a band website that has, say, a show's post type built in, so you can go in there and create a new show instead of a new post and having to do weird stuff to make it look right. So custom post type's great, but if it's in your theme, you could run into some trouble. Likewise, custom widgets. So let's say you have some really whiz-bang widget that you want to keep in the sidebars on all your pages that does something really cool, but it's part of your theme. Somewhere down the road, you might decide you want to change that theme. And you're going to find out that if you don't use the same theme, the stuff that is built into your old theme does not necessarily carry over. Especially, I've seen this a lot with custom post types. I mean, the posts, technically in WordPress, almost everything is a post. So it's not like you're losing data as such. It's just that your new theme won't know what to do with it. And you could get situations where it basically looks like data disappeared. And in the case of custom widgets that just don't exist in your theme that you've switched to, they're not gone, but unless you switch back to the old theme, you're not really going to be able to use those without getting your hands very, very dirty. So be cautious about that. Okay, so this is a little bit more of a nerdy, obscure idea, but there's a reason for this that'll become clear in a second. So if your site gets popular and you're getting a lot of email notifications because people are commenting on all your stuff, and it's actually not spam, good for you. That's great. But maybe it gets a little annoying. So I'm here to tell you that RSS is here to save the day. If you don't know what RSS is, just a quick overview. It's a sort of feed of stuff that your WordPress site publishes and people can subscribe to it and then find out when you post a new post or various other things. The reason I bring this up here is that WordPress also offers comment feeds. So you could do something like use NewsBlur or Dig Reader or the WordPress.com reader. These are all RSS reading websites. You could add your feed of your comments to that thing, and then you can monitor that instead. Just make a habit of going and checking that thing out every day. And that way you can see, oh, yep, here's some new comments without having to clog up your email. Really, I just wanted to have Mighty Mouse in there. So what are you going to do? And there's some documentation on the feeds that WordPress offers, both on WordPress.com and in the Codex at those places. And just incidentally, I'm going to make these slides available so you don't have to write down these URLs. Okay. So that was all the stuff on using WordPress. Now we're going to get into things that relate more to building with WordPress and recommendations that I have for paths that you might want to take into this way of working with WordPress. So my first recommendation, if you're going to install WordPress yourself, is use good hosting. Don't just go for what's cheap. You get what you pay for, blah, blah, blah. But it's sensible advice. There's a lot of terrible cheap hosting out there, and I'm not going to, recommend in a public way like this. I'm not going to shame any web hosting companies or anything like that. But if you want to talk to me about places that I like and have had good luck with, I'll be happy to talk about that. All I'm saying is use something that's good. Don't just go for the minimum possible price. Try and evaluate stuff that actually is good, and particularly good for WordPress. I also recommend that you make sure that, most web hosting companies, I'll get you in a second, most web hosting companies do email as well. If your web hosting company offers email, I would sort of encourage you to use it, at least as a backup to if you're using something like Gmail or Outlook.com or whatever. Use the resources that brings to you. Yeah?
Well, I was going to ask, what characteristics do you want to describe a good or bad one? What should we look for?
Okay, so in terms of WordPress, I guess in general, I would look for something that has good customer service and that performs well. Something that I look for that's a little hard to evaluate without experience, just dealing with a web host in general, is a host that doesn't oversell too much. Like if we're talking about web hosting, especially in the WordPress world, where we're talking about most of the time, at least in these groups, we're talking about relatively low price stuff. We're not talking about VPSs or that kind of thing. We're talking about stuff that you pay like $20 or less a month for. So that's called shared hosting, which means that you and a bunch of other people are all situated on one machine together. And so overselling is where a company will sell like thousands and thousands of accounts on a single box, because most people don't use their accounts to the full extent. And so, that works okay. It lets them, not have to have so many resources in terms of, hardware and whatnot. But it does mean that you can run into things like running out of memory when you're trying to run WordPress, or your site just runs super slow, or if it gets hit by, like if you get picked up by some other popular website, or Kanye tweets, a link to your site or something, and you get this huge influx of traffic, your WordPress site could tank. So it's nice to look for hosts that are better at dealing with things like that and don't oversell so much.
The
Yeah.
other thing to be aware of, some websites that have those low price points, they have file count cutoffs. And as you work with WordPress, you may not know that file count starts tracking up as you add images, as you add things that you crop down. That file count can be hidden. So as you're working with it, just be kind of aware of some of the $4, $5 per month sort of web hosts. They might have like a 30,000 or a 20,000 file count limit where they start to either call you saying, if you got too many files, you need to deal with that, at which point you're kind of already in their world. So it can be a little bit of a headache at that point if you hit one of those limits that you just didn't know were there based on their marketing material.
Yeah.
For a benchmark, how much is the cost for improved hosting?
Some of the hosts that I like are some of them are pretty cheap. Like there's one that I use that charges what? It's like $25 every 3 months. So it's still super cheap. But attached to that, in the case of this one web host, is a strict limit on bandwidth. So it's geared toward people who are more hobbyists and stuff. It's a pretty generous limit on traffic, but once you hit it, they're like, yep, that's it for you for the month. So the limitations are there, but they're really upfront about it. And the site and sites that I've put on there, it's good for low traffic stuff. It performs really well, and their customer support is great. So as long as you're aware of things like that, that particular place works for me. I personally wouldn't generally pay less than that. Like if you're going on a monthly basis, I wouldn't pay less than $10 a month. And even that, if you're really serious, if you're building something really serious, that's peanuts, especially if you're talking about a business. So, but it's not. I don't think the money is as important as other aspects.
On you. There is no kind of one answer to that. If you're a hobbyist looking at 1,000 or 2,000 pages or views per month, they're not any of the web hosts
Yeah.
that support something like that. But again, like Joe mentioned, if you get hit between Kanye, you're going to see a spike that most of those under $10 sort of web hosts just can't handle. So
Kanye tweets me all the time.
Yeah, this guy knows what I'm talking
It's
about.
becoming a problem.
It's just you gotta know your volume. So if you're looking at 10, 20, 30,000, 40,000 views a month, don't go less than 10,000.
Okay, so,
And we can talk more afterwards.
Yeah, well,
And Joe will fill you in on kind of the name
Yeah.
that he's got in his head as well.
Yeah, we can talk more about that a little later. One other thing that's good to check for in terms of a WordPress host is making sure that the way they do their PHP stuff, their whole stack of software, is compatible with things like the WordPress auto updater. So WordPress, especially in the next upcoming version, 3.7, is going to support automatic updates where you don't even have to, click the button. It will do it. You can tell it to do some of this stuff for you automatically. But even now, being able to just click a button and have WordPress update itself for you in the browser. I mean, it's running stuff on the server, but you're seeing stuff in the browser. Making sure that your web host is compatible with that kind of setup is important. And most shared hosting these days is compatible with that stuff, but you might want to check if it's something that isn't known, like if you're using maybe a lesser known web host or something that you just don't have experience yourself with it. Install WordPress on there. Make sure there's some kind of money-back guarantee in case you go to try and update your permalinks or other things where WordPress is updating files for you. And if you find out that it doesn't work, you can say, "Hey, dudes, let's fix this," or "I'm going to walk to some other company." This is not so much a WordPress thing as just a general recommendation. If you don't already own a domain, you should buy one. Buy a domain and use it. Keep control of your online identity. Don't be restricted to just having, say, a Gmail address on your website. Hook it up to a domain name, and then you can set up forwarding addresses that will send, me@mydomain.com over to your Gmail. But just have something that's branded and is really yours for your online empire. It's just a thing that I think most people do, but not everybody does, and it's something that I think is a good recommendation. Okay, so I also recommend practicing safe WordPressing. There's some basic, very basic security stuff that you can keep in mind when you start working with WordPress. First of all, don't use admin as your username. That's the default. Everybody uses it, and when somebody wants to try and get into your WordPress site and hack it, if you use the username admin, that's already something that they don't have to guess. So don't use that. Just use anything else, preferably something relatively obscure or meaningful to you. When you're setting up, yes?
All right. Once someone told me that, so I used a different name. But now I think I want to make it more difficult. Is it hard to adapt to change it?
To change the username?
Yeah.
you can't change a username in the WordPress UI, so you'd have to kind of get in and muck around in the database to do that, or maybe there's a plugin that can help you change your username. I'm not sure, but
just create a new one.
Yeah, that's the other thing.
When you go to delete the other one, it'll ask you who you want to attribute the posts for that one to. So when you actually try to delete the actual user, it'll say, okay, which user do you want to make the owner of the post that
So maybe make a new one first.
You
Yeah,
need to make
yeah,
the
you
new
have
one
to.
first.
Yep, yep, yeah. Make a new one, give it the administrator role, and then you can just delete it, and it'll functionally act the same. Yeah, so when you're setting up your WP config file, when you're installing yourself, this is a step that that you would need to do if you're not doing a WordPress installation in the browser. Use a weird database prefix. Another way that hackers like to try and mess with you is by using SQL injections. That means writing in your comment form or someplace where they can type something in, basically trying to, stuff that's MySQL to try and hijack stuff or modify things in your WordPress application. Core WordPress is really good about keeping track of things like that, and generally speaking, this is not a big risk. But if you use a strange database prefix, it makes it that much harder for somebody to try and write a weird SQL injection. So don't use WP underscore is what I'm saying, I guess. Yes?
What if it's already set up? Like what if you're going back and fixing like a client's site where they are?
Then you have a bit of a long. Well, I'm trying to remember now. Does anybody know? Is the prefix used anywhere in actual data in the database, or is it just?
I use better for the security and an option to change it after the fact.
Okay, so I'm going to guess that you probably could change it, and you just have to go in. You could either use the what it was WP Better Security.
Use a plugin to do it. There's just too many places that it could be.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If there's a plugin that does it, that's the right.
I'm sure there are others.
Yeah. So I know if I were going to tinker with it, I'd try and change it myself. The one she's talking about is called WP Better Security, and that it has a lot of features that are beyond just changing the database prefix. But yeah, that's one to check out. Okay, so I said that you should use a web host that supports the auto updater. Most of the time, that will also mean that it will support editing your theme files in the browser. Don't do that. I would recommend turning off allowing files to be edited. There's a constant in the WP config file. It's called allow file edit, I believe. And but you don't have to go so far as setting that up unless you want to get serious about security hardening your WordPress site. But I would just recommend against that kind of workflow in general. Well, I guess we're going to get to that in a minute. So I'll just say for now, don't do that, and I'll make a recommendation on a better way to go in a little bit. You want to say?
Quick question. What is this database prefix? What are you referring to?
When WordPress creates its MySQL tables, it prefixes each. So the way MySQL is built, you have a database, and then inside that database, you create a bunch of tables, and the tables are what have the rows and columns of stuff. So the prefix is used as a naming prefix so that you can install WordPress in a MySQL database that might already have other stuff in it, and so you avoid name collisions in the table names. Okay, so don't use FTP, vanilla FTP. Use SFTP if it's available, or use FTP over SSL or over TLS. One of those ways, because FTP is awful. It's a security risk. A lot of web hosts, a lot of the better web hosts, they might support it, but they will discourage you from using it. I also use SSH because I'm a command line nerd, but I don't expect you to have that kind of desire. But it is another way of getting into your site and accessing it securely. Yes.
I'm not too familiar with some of these terms, but I did sign up with GoDaddy, and I can call them trying to upsell me something for security. Do you know if GoDaddy uses those?
GoDaddy does support, I think by default they might support FTP over SSL. I know you can turn, even in their cheap Linux web hosting, you can turn on SSH. And then depending on how your FTP client works, sometimes you can tunnel vanilla FTP over SSH, or there's other ways of getting a graphical file browser that will still use SSH to connect to your server, but present you with something that looks more like regular FTP and is a lot nicer to deal with than having to type out all the commands.
Perfect. Now, this is something I have to turn on.
Yes, they at least last time, I mean, I don't use GoDaddy myself, but many of my clients do. The last time I had to deal with it, it was something you had to turn on, and I think it was even the sort of thing where you check the checkbox and then they call you, and you have to, and they give you a code or something. I don't remember how it works, but you do have to turn it on.
Perfect, thank you.
Sure.
Hey, Joe,
Yeah.
this is another one of those web hosting things. Some web hosts will let you do this, some won't. If your web host doesn't let you do this, run.
Yep. Yeah. Don't. Yeah. That's a good point.
And run.
Yep. Yeah. Don't. Yep. Run. Don't walk.
For most, at least with SSH, okay? So FTP over SSH is what he's talking about with the tunnel. I won't get into the, you can talk with me afterwards if you want a little bit more technical conversation, but Bluehost, for example, what they do is they require you to mail in your driver's license and to enable, I don't have a problem with that. What they're doing is they're validating who you are to protect their SSH. So it's not hard to do. There might be one little hoop you have to jump through, but it's worth it for protecting your online. So whoever your host is, do it.
Yep. That's a good point. And there's a page on the WordPress Codex called Hardening WordPress that will give you some of these things and a whole bunch more stuff if you want to get super serious about the hardening. In this case is a security term, just meaning making it harder to crack your site. How are we doing on time, by the way? I want to make sure I'm not obliterating.
Build your way through it. Let the horse be your guide.
Yeah, I know. I want to make sure Lucy has time too.
Oh, okay, yeah.
We good?
It's cool.
All right.
I feel really good about everything.
Good. I feel good that you feel good. Okay, so if you're building WordPress stuff, you're going to need, whether you want to or not, to make some new friends. You're going to need to become friends with HTML. HTML5, would be nice, but HTML. CSS, these are the tools, the minimum tools that you need to start working with themes in WordPress, and really for any kind of web development where you want to be able to control how a thing looks. They're pretty easy technologies as these things go, and will get you very far. If you're, I was going to just put JavaScript in here, but there isn't really a JavaScript logo. And, WordPress comes with jQuery, so it'll stand in. You can learn them both. JavaScript and jQuery are, JavaScript is a programming language that I'm sure we've all heard of. It's basically the programming language of the web, because it can be run in a browser to do things like make things move around and control drop-down menus and all kinds of goodies. And it also can be run on the server, which is kind of interesting. WordPress doesn't use that, but anyway, that's what JavaScript is. And then it includes this library called jQuery, which is built on top of JavaScript and lets you do really nifty stuff a lot easier than in vanilla JavaScript. So learning these three things will get you a long way toward being able to do all kinds of stuff in your WordPress themes that you make yourself or that you modify from others that you bought. Now, also, if you want to get really serious, or even just kind of serious, learning a bit of PHP would be good. Now, you can do this, like the way I learned PHP at first was just looking at stuff that other people had made and kind of taking it apart and seeing what, just trying to read it and see what happens. Of course, you could do better than that by taking a course online or just looking at videos on YouTube or what have you. But learning a bit of PHP, while it might sound a little intimidating at first because it's a programming language, in terms of what you need to do things in a WordPress theme, not too difficult. And there's even a lot of good example code in the WordPress Codex for various things that you might want to do. So I guess what I'm saying here is don't be afraid of PHP. Check it out. Okay, glasses. What does that mean? This is the new logo for SAS.
Really?
Yeah. For SAS. SAS stands for Syntactically Awesome Style Sheets. And it's a preprocessor for CSS that makes, now, of course, if you've never touched CSS before, you're going to be like, huh? But once you start to work with CSS on a regular basis, some things about it might start to annoy you, like how you have to write things over and over again to style an element that's contained inside another element, and then stuff that's contained inside that, and so forth. Sass is it's kind of like it's a very similar language that sits on top of CSS and makes a lot of that stuff a lot more pleasant, and then you can basically hit a button or not hit a button depending on how you're set up, and it will generate CSS for you that's all nicely formatted and written out, and it can minify it to make it nice and fast to download, and it's super awesome. And yeah, but if you've never touched CSS before, it's just going to go sailing over your head. So, and that's fine. I just want to point out that this is a thing that exists, and you might hear about it. So as you start working with some of these technologies, it could be a place that if you start to get that dissatisfied feeling, or you find yourself slamming your head into your desk a little more than you like, then you could start looking at something like Sass to help you out. Okay. For your first project, I recommend checking out making a child theme. When you first start working in WordPress, a very obvious place to start having to tinker with stuff is to make a theme. But I would recommend not even thinking so much about making your own theme from scratch necessarily, and starting with an existing theme and making a child theme from it. So what that means is it's a theme that's based on another theme, meaning you only need to modify just the little bits that you want to change. So the first use case that I think, other than doing things like changing colors and fonts and that kind of stuff, which depending on how the theme is built, you don't even need to make a child theme to do. It could be in your theme settings. But something like creating a widget region. You could make a child theme that would do this with just a few lines, and I mean literally a few lines. You could do it, I think, in maybe 6 lines of PHP. That will, in this case, this is the default installation of 2012, the theme that comes with WordPress. And you could do something like, say, I want to create a widget region that goes up in that upper right corner where there is no widget region built in because I want to put in, a sign up for my mailing list form or something. So looking into how to make a child theme can really help you with this. I gave a presentation on how to do this back in January, I think, or something. There's a lot of resources for this online, but just in general, as you start to work with WordPress in a kind of builder context, this is a really good first project that I'd recommend you check out. Okay, we're getting toward the end here. So I recommend, just in general, not being afraid of WordPress. Be bold and make mistakes. Break stuff. Don't worry about it. And the reason that I'm saying you can break stuff and not worry about it is because there are technologies that can set up a very safe sandbox where you're not working on somebody else's website, you're not working on the thing publicly where other people can see you breaking stuff, unless you're into that. But there are various technologies that can help you run WordPress on your own computer. So these icons, the 2 windows over on the left are for a product called Desktop Server, which is made by a company called ServerPress, which I think is based in San Diego. I personally don't use it because I do a lot of stuff that's not WordPress as well, so I kind of had my own ways that I'm having a hard time breaking out of. But if you're starting out and you want to run WordPress specifically on your own computer, do check out Desktop Server. By what everybody who uses it around here tells me, it's the bee's knees. I personally use the second thing on there, which is called MAMP. That's its icon. There's a free version and a pro version. All of these things are, it's basically what's called an AMP stack. That means a web server, which is Apache in all these cases, a MySQL database, and PHP, AMP, AMP stack. And then this one's called MAMP because it runs on a Mac. So there's also this other one called XAMPP, the orange icon on there, which you can find for every platform. And then the last one is for the real propeller heads in the crowd. It's called Vagrant. And that lets you create an actual virtual machine, which is not just your computer running stuff, but a virtualized machine that you can install whatever you want. And you can spin those up and create very specific environments for every project you're working on. If you start getting into things where you're working on real serious client sites, Vagrant could be a good thing to look into. But for simple cases, and certainly when you're just getting started, don't even look at that. Look at ServerPress and maybe some of these other technologies. All this means that you can just download WordPress, stick it in a folder on your computer, turn on this web server, load up your browser, and then you're just working on your computer. You don't need Wi-Fi, you don't need nothing. Just what you got in front of you, and then you can start tinkering away with WordPress and doing all kinds of goodies. What this means then is that you can start doing all your stuff and then upload the files that you've changed, your new theme or whatever that you've built on your computer, put it on your web server, and it'll just work because you built it on the same technology. So a great workflow when you start tinkering with WordPress, especially, I mean, and even if you already have a WordPress site that you're messing with now, it'd just be to get one of these products if you don't have it already. And just for the record, there are free versions of all of them. You can download all those files, stick them in a folder, install this thing, point it at that folder, and I guess Bob's your uncle. Also, in terms of being safe, in terms of making mistakes, you should be very competent in backing up your WordPress sites so that you can, if you do need to make a change on a server or whatever, that you can recover from those changes if something goes wrong. So usually we can just use, if you're just starting out, you can just use FTP, SSH, and all that kind of stuff to pull the files down so you can take a backup that way, no big deal. But for the database, you can either get into your hosting control panel and get into PHP My Admin or whatever the database management thingy is that your hosting company provides, or you can use WordPress plugins. There's a plugin called WP Migrate DB. There's a free version that you can just download from WordPress.org, and there's also a pro version that the same developer makes. And this will help you move databases between, say, your remote server and your local computer that's running ServerPress or what have you. If you get the pro version, it can help you sync data up and down, and it gets really slick. A simpler one that will just help you take a quick backup of your database and save it on your computer is WP DB Backup. Both of them work well. WP DB Backup has been around for almost literally ever in the WordPress world, and they both work just fine. But just make sure that, before you deal with anything serious and WordPress says, hey, you really ought to take a backup of your database before updating WordPress, do that. If you use one of these plugins, it does not take long, and most of the time everything's going to work fine, right? But on the times that it doesn't, you will feel really bad, or you should, if you didn't take a backup. Okay, one more thing. Yes?
What is actually the purpose of the actual backup? Are you just protecting your database?
Yep.
That's it?
Yeah, I mean, so it depends. Like when you're backing up your, in the case of updating WordPress to a new major version, say, or especially if you're going from like 2.9 up to 3.6, what happens when WordPress runs that update is that it changes a bunch of files and it changes a bunch of stuff in your database. So if you're working in an environment where any amount of downtime is unacceptable, which is most cases, if you save a backup before you do that, and then you run the thing and something goes wrong, you can be like, uh-oh, all right, I'm going to have to figure this out later. Let me restore the database and let me restore the files to the state they were in before. So at least the thing is not down forever. That's the point. Yeah.
What is the difference between the last plugin you said and also Dropbox?
Backup to Dropbox. I mean, you know what Dropbox is. Whatever works for you. I mean, backing up to Dropbox is fine, and especially if you have it running on some kind of automated schedule, that's nice. I'm thinking of what I was advocating for here is just something that will let you take a backup just on demand when you need to. And you can download that and then stick it in your Dropbox if you want to. But I personally like to make sure that I have at least one copy of everything that's not somewhere in the cloud also. But they'll all do a fine job. Okay, so this is the nerdiest tip of the entire night. If you have ever thought to yourself, boy, WordPress is so easy, but I just really don't like having to click all these buttons in my browser. There is a thing called WordPress CLI. Now, I understand that I might only be talking to myself in the mirror when I say this, but something like this to me is pretty cool because it's basically a Swiss Army knife that you can run on the command line that can do all kinds of stuff. And I should say, also working in Drupal, there's a similar tool for Drupal that does this stuff. And so when this came out, I and other friends of mine who use both were like, ooh, 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 went running over like moths to the light. But it does things like you can change directories into a folder and type a command that says WP, download core, and it will download all those files for you without you having to go to the WordPress site and do it yourself. You can switch themes, and basically, if you're in a situation where you need to automate more than one WordPress website, or if you're just a little bit of a propeller head like me, then I just want you to know that something like this exists. You don't have to care about it. Just know that it's there. Okay, so in summation, WordPress, it's cool, it's empowering, it can let you do all kinds of stuff. It lets you become a superstar blogger, or lets you just build your own website, lets you build a friend's website, it lets you do stuff for work, it can get you jobs, it's super great. So, with WordPress, it's empowering, and as a result, you, as a user of WordPress, are an empowered person. And you should be unafraid. Don't be afraid of WordPress. Work with it, start building stuff, whether it's just installing it and creating content, or you want to, you don't care about content so much, maybe you want to just make a theme and make stuff that looks cool, or get a job and work for somebody. Just, make use of WordPress. It's great. And then as you have gone through this learning process, you should feel free to ask questions, ask me, ask everybody else who's here. And then when you've learned stuff, you can talk about it, you can write about it on your fancy new blog, and just, share the knowledge that you're learning. That's what it's all about. That's why we're here. That's why I'm here. And it's the clarion call to go forth and make cool stuff. That's it.